Welcome back to Book Summary Podcast, book lovers.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving deep into Mary Shelley's The Last Man.
Oh, yeah.
It paints this, incredibly vivid picture
Uh-huh.
of a world ravaged by plague.
Yeah.
Where just a handful of people are left to navigate the ruins of civilization.
Yeah.
If you love post-apocalyptic stories that really make you think about humanity
Right.
and what it means to survive, this one's for you.
Yeah, definitely.
And hey, if you're enjoying this deep dive so far,
Right.
don't forget to hit that like button
Uh-huh.
and subscribe for more bookish adventures like this.
It's interesting how Shelley doesn't just throw us into this desolate world.
Right.
Instead, she really takes her time building up the protagonist, Lionel Verney.
Right.
We get to see how growing up in this shattered world shaped his whole outlook. It's like understanding his past is the key to understanding everything that happens next.
It's true. His childhood is anything but ordinary. Imagine growing up amidst the ruins of a society you never really knew.
Right.
And his father.
Yeah.
He was a court jester before the world went sideways.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah.
A figure associated with laughter and lightheartedness.
Right.
In a world steeped in tragedy.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
What role does humor play in a world where everything feels so bleak?
Right.
What does it say about the human spirit that even in the face of such immense loss, there's still this capacity for laughter, for finding joy in the absurd?
And that's something that Lionel's father really instills in him. Even though he was ostracized by the court, this jester, he never loses his love for knowledge, for finding meaning in the world around him.
And that's what he passes on to Lionel. You know, Lionel discovers this collection of ancient literature, the works of Virgil specifically.
Yeah.
In a world where so much has been lost,
Right.
these words become a lifeline for him, a connection to a past that feels both familiar and incredibly distant.
Yeah.
It's like stepping into a time machine, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly, he's not alone anymore. He's got these ancient voices whispering in his ear, offering guidance and solace.
It's almost like having a conversation with the ghosts of history.
Yeah.
And you can see how Virgil and those classical ideals of heroism and virtue, they really shape Lionel's worldview.
Yeah.
It's like he's taking those lessons from the past and trying to apply them to this new, chaotic reality.
And I think that's a really important point. It's not just about escaping into these stories.
Right.
It's about finding guidance, a framework for understanding the world.
Yeah.
And for Lionel, that framework comes from these ancient texts, these echoes of a civilization that in many ways mirrors his own.
It sets the stage for his entire journey. He's not just surviving. He's actively seeking something more, a purpose, a connection.
Yeah.
And speaking of connection,
Right.
let's talk about the other characters who enter Lionel's life.
Yeah.
We meet his sister Perdita, this deeply introspective, complex young woman. She's such a contrast to Lionel's more straightforward, action-oriented nature.
I think their dynamic is fascinating. They both grew up in the same environment, experienced the same losses, but they process it also differently.
Yeah.
Perdita is drawn inward, lost in her thoughts and emotions, while Lionel is more outward focused, driven by action and the need to protect those he loves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's those differences that make their relationship so compelling.
Right.
Then you have the love stories that unfold. Lionel's enduring love for his wife, Idris, who becomes this anchor of hope in a world that feels like it's constantly falling apart.
And then there's Perdita, whose love for Lord Raymond is much more turbulent, more passionate, and ultimately much more tragic.
Yeah.
It's like Shelley is showing us these different facets of love, how it can sustain us, but also how it can consume us.
Right.
Especially in a world where everything feels so precarious.
And those relationships, they're not just about romance, right? They're about the bonds we forge with others, the ways we try to find meaning and connection in a world that often feels meaningless and isolating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there are these other key figures like Lord Raymond himself, ambitious, charismatic, and undeniably flawed.
Right.
And you can't forget Adrian, Lord Raymond's foil.
Right.
He's driven by reason, by a deep sense of duty. They represent these different ways of approaching leadership, of navigating power in a world that's falling apart.
It's like Shelley is setting up this complex web of relationships that mirrors the larger societal struggles.
Yeah.
And speaking of struggles,
Right.
if you're loving this deep dive into The Last Man, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and stay.
And how they reflect the broader societal tensions bubbling beneath the surface.
Right.
And then boom, the plague hits.
Yeah.
And it's like Shelley throws gasoline on that fire.
Yeah.
Everything changes.
Right. It's not just the physical devastation. It's the way the plague dismantles everything they thought they knew about the world.
Right.
Their sense of security, their trust in each other.
Yeah.
It all starts to crumble.
Right.
It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck.
Yeah.
You know it's coming, but you can't look away.
Exactly. And what's so masterful about Shelley's writing is how she captures that psychological unraveling.
Right.
We see it most clearly in Perdita.
All right.
Remember, she was already struggling with grief and loss.
Right.
And the plague just amplifies those emotions tenfold.
She becomes almost fixated on death, on the loss of Lord Raymond.
Right.
It's like she's lost the will to live, even though Lionel is desperately trying to pull her back from the brink.
It's heartbreaking to watch,
Yeah.
you know. It's like she's trapped in this cycle of grief and despair.
Right.
Unable to see any hope for the future. And you have to remember, this book was written in a time when pandemics were a very real threat.
Right.
People were living with this constant fear of disease, of societal collapse.
Yeah.
So there's this added layer of anxiety, this sense that the world could end at any moment.
Right.
That resonates really strongly with contemporary readers.
It's almost like Shelley is holding a mirror up to our own anxieties about the fragility of life, the things we take for granted that could be ripped away in an instant.
Right.
And those anxieties, they don't discriminate. We see the other survivors wrestling with their own fears and doubts.
Yeah.
Their faith is shaken, their beliefs are challenged, and they're forced to confront the darkness that lies at the heart of human nature.
Right. It's not just about surviving the physical threat of the plague.
Right.
It's about surviving the psychological and emotional fallout.
Yeah.
It's about finding a way to hold on to hope, to believe in something, even when everything around you is falling apart.
And isn't that something we all grapple with?
Yeah.
Even if it's not on such a grand apocalyptic scale?
Right.
Finding meaning in the face of adversity?
Yeah.
Clinging to those glimmers of hope, even when the world feels dark?
Absolutely. And, you know, despite all that darkness, there are these moments of light in the story, too.
Yeah.
Like when they find that abandoned villa on Lake Como,
Yeah.
it's like stepping into a dream.
Yeah.
This idyllic escape from the horrors they've witnessed.
I love that part. They rediscover beauty in the natural world, in music, in simply being together.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the midst of devastation, there's still room for joy, for human connection.
For a brief time, it's like they've created this little utopia, this pocket of peace in a world gone mad.
Right.
But of course it can't last, can it?
No.
Tragedy seems to follow them wherever they go.
Right. It's like the plague has set off this chain reaction, this ripple effect of loss and devastation that they can't outrun. First, Lionel's young son, Evelyn, falls ill and dies.
Oh, yeah.
It's a devastating blow, a reminder that even in the midst of relative safety, they're still vulnerable.
And then just when you think it can't get any worse,
Right.
Idris Lionel's wife contracts the plague. The irony is just crushing.
Yeah.
They've survived war, famine, even the initial outbreak, only to be struck down by the very thing they've been running from all this time.
You can feel Lionel's desperation as he tries to save her, clinging to every shred of hope.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he's powerless to stop the inevitable. It's a reminder that even the strongest love, the deepest connection, can't always conquer death.
And it's Idris's death that truly breaks Lionel.
Right.
It's the loss that shatters him, that forces him to confront the depths of his own grief and isolation.
Right.
But even in his despair, he finds the strength to care for his remaining daughter, Clara.
It's like she becomes his reason for living, his anchor in this storm of grief and loss.
Yeah.
It's a testament to the power of parental love.
Right.
That even in the face of such immense tragedy, it can still give us the strength to keep going.
It's also interesting to consider the Countess, Adrian's mother, and her death during this time. She represents this old world, this clinging to power and control that seems completely out of place in this new reality. It's almost like her death symbolizes the end of an era, the final collapse of the old order.
It's like Shelley is saying, look, the world has irrevocably changed.
Yeah.
There's no going back to the way things were. And Lionel, He's forced to face that reality head on.
And it's in the midst of all this loss, all this upheaval, that Lionel really starts to wrestle with the big questions. He questions his faith, the nature of good and evil, the meaning of it all. It's like he's searching for answers in a world that no longer makes sense.
He's trying to reconcile the beauty he still sees in the world with the horrors he's witnessed. And honestly, isn't that a question we all ask ourselves at some point? How do we make sense of suffering, of loss, of this seemingly random cruelty of life?
It's a universal struggle, right? And Shelley doesn't offer any easy answers. But she does suggest that perhaps the answers lie not in grand pronouncements or religious dogma, but in the simple act of living, of enduring, of finding moments of beauty and connection, even in the darkest of times.
And that's where we leave Lionel for now, grieving, caring for Clara, and preparing to face an uncertain future. But what about Adrian? We haven't forgotten about him. What becomes of the Lord Protector? The man who tried so hard to hold on to order in a world consumed by chaos. That's a story. For our next installment, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the final chapter of our deep dive into The Last Man. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into The Last Man. We left off with Lionel facing a future shaped by loss, his daughter Clara, his sole companion. And we left Adrian, the ever-dutiful Lord Protector, struggling to maintain order in a crumbling world. It's almost like their journeys become two sides of the same coin.
It's a really interesting contrast. You have Lionel grappling with grief and isolation on a deeply personal level. And then you have Adrian wrestling with these larger societal forces. It's the internal versus the external, the individual versus the collective. But they're both, in their own ways, confronting the same fundamental questions about what it means to be human in a world that's lost its moorings.
And remember, Adrian isn't immune to the personal toll of the plague. He's experienced the same horrors, the same losses as everyone else. He's carrying that weight too, even as he tries to project an image of strength and leadership.
It's a heavy burden to bear, right? To try to be a beacon of hope when you yourself are grappling with doubt and despair. And I think that's what makes Adrian such a compelling character. He's not some stoic, unfeeling figurehead. He's deeply human, deeply flawed, and ultimately just as vulnerable as everyone else.
He's trying to hold on to reason, to order, in a world that seems determined to descend into chaos. And yet, despite all his efforts, the foundations of that order continue to erode. He faces rebellions, challenges to his authority, this growing sense of disillusionment among the survivors. It's like even Adrian, with all his good intentions and intellect, can't fully stem the tide.
It makes you think, doesn't it? What happens to our ideals or systems of governance when faced with such profound upheaval? Can reason truly prevail when fear and desperation are running rampant? I think Shelley is asking some really tough questions here about the limits of human power and control. Especially in the face of forces that seem beyond our comprehension.
And that's where the relationship between Adrian and Lionel becomes even more significant. They need each other, even if they don't always realize it. They represent these two different but interconnected aspects of the human experience in the face of apocalypse.
Yes, and that's highlighted beautifully when they reunite in Switzerland, right? They've established this small colony of survivors, this fragile attempt at rebuilding, at finding a semblance of normalcy in a world that feels anything but normal.
It's a really poignant moment. For a little while, it seems like they might actually succeed. They celebrate Christmas together, share stories, cling to these traditions that connect them to the past, to a sense of community. It's like they're creating a new family, a new society out of the wreckage of the old.
It's a reminder of the power of human connection, the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of such overwhelming loss. But of course, this being the last man, we know that peace can't last forever. The plague might be gone, but now nature itself seems to turn against them. There are storms, earthquakes, this looming sense of dread that pervades everything.
It's like Shelley is saying that even if humanity manages to survive the plague, there are other forces, other threats that could wipe us out. It's a reminder of how precarious our existence truly is.
And this time, there's no escape. They flee across Europe, their numbers dwindling with each passing day, their hopes fading with every mile they travel. And on this final, desperate journey, Lionel truly begins to confront his fate as the last man.
He watches those closest to him die. Adrian's mother, his own sister Perdita, It's like each death chips away at him, leaving him more and more isolated, more alone.
This journey becomes a brutal, relentless descent into solitude.
Yeah.
And yet, even as he grieves these losses, Lionel never completely gives up. He cares for Clara. He keeps moving forward, even when there seems to be no point.
It's a testament to the human will to survive, isn't it? That even when faced with the most profound despair, we can still find the strength to keep going, to keep breathing, to keep hoping.
Exactly. And then finally, the inevitable happens. Adrian, his last remaining companion, succumbs to illness.
Oh, wow.
Lionel is truly, utterly alone, the last man on Earth.
It's a powerful, devastating moment.
Yeah.
And the way Shelley describes Lionel's wanderings through a deserted Italy is both haunting and beautiful. He's this solitary witness to the end of humanity, this living embodiment of grief and loss. He visits the ruins of civilization, tries to make sense of what's happened, to reconcile himself to his fate.
There's a passage where he talks about how silence has become his only companion.
Right.
It's a chilling thought to imagine a world without the sound of human voices, without laughter, without music.
It's a testament to Shelley's skill as a writer, that she can evoke such a powerful sense of loneliness, of emptiness through her words.
And yet, amidst all that bleakness, there are these glimmers of hope, these moments of transcendence. Lionel finds solace in nature, in the beauty of the world, in the memories of those he's lost.
Yeah.
He doesn't succumb to despair. He chooses to live, to remember, to find meaning in the face of meaninglessness.
And ultimately, that's what The Last Man is all about, isn't it? It's a story about loss, about grief, about the fragility of human existence. But it's also a story about hope, about resilience, about the enduring power of the human spirit.
It's a book that asks big questions about what it means to be human, about the things that connect us, the things that sustain us, the things that give our lives meaning. And I think in the end, it leaves us with a sense of cautious optimism. It reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable loss, even when everything seems lost, there's still beauty to be found, there's still love to be cherished, there's still hope to be held on to.
So there you have it, listeners, our deep dive into Mary Shelley's The Last Man. It's a challenging read, no doubt, but also a deeply rewarding one. It's a book that stays with you long after you've finished reading it.
Right.
A book that makes you think about the world, about humanity, about your own place in the grand scheme of things.
If you enjoyed this exploration of The Last Man, be sure to let us know in the comments.
Right.
And if you're hungry for more literary deep dives,
hit
that subscribe button and join us on our next adventure into the world of books.
Until then, happy reading.